and market rate work as well. And so I was lucky to be able in my career to kind of have that unique combination of experiences. And here I am. For those who might not know, the Department of Planning and Development took 8 separate city functions and departments and combined them into one. So we now have 3 divisions. So our division of Planning and Zoning is the Planning Commission, the Historical Commission, the Art Commission, and the Zoning Board. We have Development Services, which provides assistance to developers and businesses in order to get through all our various approval process and entitlements. And then we have our Division of Housing and Community Development, which is a city department agency, which is housing and community development. But then we also have our sister functions, which is the Land Bank, the Redevelopment Authority, and the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation. Not quite a year ago, we were able to take the Land Bank, the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, and the Redevelopment Authority, and even though the boards exist and the functions exist and the entities exist separately, all the employees now work for PHDC. So there's only one employment agency, which was very important because now those same employees can work across all those agencies, more akin to how PIDC works.
So before it was just kind of like all these strands all over the place, but never like all pulling back into one kind of one central spot. So how many people are underneath of you?
I think we're around 250-ish.
Okay. It's a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
Yes. But I have a good team. So I have 4 deputies, and then there's kind of another layer under them. So there's kind of a core group of about 12 of us, and then, the staffs. And we're very lucky. I'm very lucky with the people I work with. I would say they really are the exception to the rule about the stereotype about government workers. These guys really dig in. They take their work very seriously. They're very passionate about the work, really see it as public service. And I feel very lucky with all the folks on my staff.
Well, the good thing is you have that unique background of working both in the public sector and the private sector. Very often in public service, it seems like you're kind of like on that rail, and that's kind of where you stay. And obviously a lot of our folks say, oh, they don't understand. They don't know what it's like to be, on the other side of things. And now you have someone in a very prominent role.
I mean, I
understands.
I've signed a personal guarantee before. I know what that means.
So personally, how you been handling all this? Aside from the work stuff, just you getting through the day to day.
I have to say that the work stuff is very intense. So for me, I would say one of the most aggravating things is, there's so much out there in the world now about, if you're looking for something to do or something to watch on Netflix or something to stream, or, you want to get into cooking or baking again. I'm like, are you kidding me? Looking for something to do. Like I said, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. This is my 3rd meeting of the day. So the work stuff just continues, right? So the days are going by very quickly. And I will say I'm very active, right? This is the most I've ever sat in probably years. So I do have things that I've done for that. I used to keep a little mini elliptical machine in my office. I brought that home. I also have a desk that I bought here that has a bike attached to it, so I can do that. I get out and do walks. So I think that's pretty well. I think the hard part is because there is no separation now between work and home, is emails never stop now. People are, and I think it's because people have to adjust their hours, right? So I have folks on my staff who, let's say from like 4 to 7, they go dark because they're dealing with the kids, they're feeding them, and then all of a sudden they're back into it at 8 or 9 at night, and then you get this other barrage coming in. So I think trying to figure that, what is the new routine out, has been tricky. My partner's working at home as well, so sometimes figuring out simultaneous Zoom calls and things like that can be a little tricky. But I have to say, and I'm sorry for those of you who do have small kids at home, we are very thankful that our kids are grown and that we're not also juggling that, because I just think that is just really an incredible thing. And I will tell you just really quickly, another thing on a personal note is when I was in 8th grade, my school district had a strike kind of in the middle of winter, which was really fun in Wisconsin, for 50 some days. And I know the impact that had on me as a kid and that break in my education. And so I really have an understanding of that. And I think that that is really difficult. And we're going to see some ramifications of that years down the road when we come out about that period, that window of time when kids sort of lost that socialization that happens at school and that interaction, and also not really understanding what that's going to look like when we come out of this on the back end. I think that's going to have social ramifications that we don't really understand yet.
Yeah, a lot to be figured out and to see where it goes. If you could, let's go back to the Philly First Home program. Not everybody has necessarily a full understanding of that. Could you explain to us what that program is and
can't believe you guys don't understand it, because you guys are rocking it. I mean, it just so let me just say, the city has for years had a settlement assistance program, and I can't remember exactly what the levels were over, but when I first came back in 2016, the amount of assistance that was being provided was $500, which was like, really? I mean, it was just a drop in the bucket. And then when JP Morgan Chase came into town, you know, they said, we really want to, you know, they like to do some community building when they come into, you know, when they come in to get business from a city. And so, yeah, they built a bunch of bank branches and other things, but they really wanted to also provide some sort of community development assistance. And so they really helped take the $500 to $1,500. But when we were doing our housing action plan and looking at best practices, you know, one of the things that had really fallen off as far as our community development efforts was home ownership. Because the way the city used to do it was they would build the housing, or they would find a nonprofit or for-profit that would build the housing, but essentially the city funded the whole housing unit, which meant it was a ridiculously expensive housing unit because it came with all our stuff, right? It came with not just labor rates, but you had to have these requirements and this spec and this on top and this inspection, and it just a lot of stuff that added to the cost. And so what was happening was, at a time that our federal, you know, our housing dollars were decreasing, we were producing a very expensive unit of house. And so that house may cost us, you know, at $250,000, $300,000 to build. It was only affordable to somebody who could afford to pay $100,000, $150,000. So for one unit of housing, we were subsidizing that one unit to the tune of, you know, upwards of $150,000. And then when the mortgage crisis hit, right, not only were we building that thing at a ridiculous cost, but then we couldn't sell it because a lot of our clientele wasn't able to qualify for a mortgage, and they just sat there. And so the city really got out of the home ownership business. Well, we really wanted to pick it up again, but we wanted to do it in a different way, in a way that made more sense about how we could not just say the public sector needs to do home ownership housing, but how could we leverage the private sector? And so we thought about this and realized, you know, with the median home price at the time in Philadelphia, that was probably in the 150 to 160 range. It had risen since then. That, oh my God, 50% of our housing stock was affordable to the population that we were trying to serve without us having to put $1 into building a unit. Why don't we just try to make the private market accessible to some of our middle income and lower income folks, and how could we best do that? And it was realized that, you know, people could pay their rent. They didn't have necessarily horrible credit. Maybe they needed a little bit of credit support, but really they just couldn't save up. They couldn't save for that down payment and the closing costs. And we thought, well, what if we did that? What if we provided a chunk of dollars? And so we came up with a program in cooperation with City Council called Philly First Home, where we provide up to $10,000 in closing cost assistance. And, you know, we thought we had hit on something. We thought it would be successful. We initially funded the program with $3 million and blew through that, I would say, in maybe a month and a half, and was able to, in the first year, we ended up putting about $12 million into the program. We're not even through the first year yet. Right? We probably can't stay with that level of funding, but we are going to try to fund it as much as we can to meet demand. And it's just been hugely successful and been a great test case, if you will, to show how if you take government and just provide the little bit of assistance that's needed, how you can really leverage those public dollars. Because before, when you know that money we were putting into one unit, that same amount of money now is literally about 17 new households that get access to home ownership as opposed to one. And it's enlivened all the private market to do what they do. And our leverage ratio is something like 18 or 19 to 1 based on, you know, the public money that goes in. And we've never seen that, right? Never seen that. So it's been, it's just been a great program for us. I think the realtors really appreciate it. We know the new homeowners. I mean, we know that that's our best way to build equity. And it's just such a better system than us trying to do it house by house. And so, so that's the program.
Council, go ahead, Summer.
I was asking basically in terms of the return of investment for this program. What has been? I mean, I know city is putting in money in, but they're also going to make in the long run, not in the short run, but in the long run is going to benefit the city of Philadelphia because more homes are being bought. That means more transfer tax, more property tax.
Yeah, so, I would say,
I
would just say this, we're somewhere between like 50 and 60% of the money we're putting in comes back to the city in transfer tax. So, you know, we, up until the virus came, I mean, we were in conversations with finance about, can we just sort of revolve that money? Let's just say all conversations about the budget have taken a totally different turn. But yeah, it's been a huge benefit to the city, and not just in that, right? It's also people buy furniture and that's sales tax, and people hire movers and people. So we know based from what we experienced in 2008, 9, 10, that when the housing market goes, that it really affects a lot of industry. So when the housing market comes up, it has that positive effect as well.
Yeah, one of the biggest cheerleaders has to be Herb Wetzel and council president. Herb, Summer and I had a meeting with Herb probably in February, late January. And anyone who knows Herb, when he gets excited about something, you're going to get 3-ring binders and you're looking over his shoulder at his desktop and all that stuff like that. But clearly they knew that city council president's office knew that they had hit on a winner with this. And they were just ecstatic to see what could potentially come before, and that is obviously before the virus, what could be done to expand or grow that program. Just want to go inside the chat. We have a question as it relates to the Philly First Home program. And it says, so if a settlement was originally scheduled for April, but was given a 30-day extension due to COVID-19, which meant it would close in May. Are you saying?
Yeah, so I would say to contact the housing counseling agency that you're working through on that. I mean, because that's a little bit of a unique situation because it kind of falls in the middle. So I understand why you're asking the question, because what we basically said to housing counseling agencies, if you had a settlement scheduled in April, you know, do everything you could to hit the settlement date. But if you were scheduling, you know, when you're starting to schedule new settlements, don't schedule them in May because we want to use May to catch up on things from April. So I have a feeling probably that since that was originally scheduled in April, you can probably close it in May, but I would verify with your housing counseling agency. What we wanted to do was give folks kind of May to catch up on the April closings that had been delayed. Or like I said, some of them were scheduled and then the money got transferred and went to a title company that was closed. And so then it took time to get the money back and get it rescheduled. And so really May was the time. We just didn't want any new settlements to get scheduled in May. For new applications, we So I think if you contact the housing counseling agency, there's probably a pretty good possibility you can get that property to closing.
Okay. Do you know anything about the records department and remote online notary?
You know, I don't, but I do know Jim Leonard, who runs the records department, who I'm sure is trying to do every single thing he can to get it as up and running as possible. The governor just signed, I think it's Senate Bill 841 or something like that, that really allows for electronic notary, allows for virtual public meetings. I mean, we're trying to figure out how we can stand up some of our public meetings virtually. And that just happened, I want to say, in the last 24 to 48 hours. So hopefully that will help folks figure out, but I cannot emphasize enough that government was probably the least prepared to have everything go tech. Because even the tech we have is really outdated and a lot of folks just didn't have tech. But I know Jim Leonard, and so I'm sure he's doing everything he can to try to get that up and running.
Okay. Another question about housing counselors. I'm not sure if you see that question there, Ann. Will housing counselors now conduct meetings virtually for those who can?
Yeah, so they are doing things through teleconference.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit. Something that's very near and dear to our association over the last few years, 10-year tax abatement. Look into your crystal ball. What do you see? Anything?
You know, this is a tough question because, like I said before, even though there's parallels being made to the recession, this is very, very different. It's just very different what the city's going through right now. I will say this, there's not, other than in the development community, nobody else is talking about tax abatement, right? The focus is really just trying to make sure people survive and to keep the lights on. I would expect that after budget season in this council, there might be more conversations about that in the summer and fall. It's going to be a tough conversation.
Yeah.
Because I think there's definitely going to be, there's still contingent folks out there who think there should be no tax abatement at all.
Right.
I think that council is not going to be all excited about taking on the issue again. And I think there is an understanding that, we came out of the recession relatively strong compared to other folks in our region. And a lot of people credit that with the tax abatement. But I'm just going to say it, the devastation this time is going to be at such a different level that the conversation around extending a tax break is going to be a difficult conversation. So I think it's a conversation that probably definitely needs to be had, but I think how it gets framed and how it gets put forth and how it ties to recovery and how that recovery really affects the people that are going to be hardest hit by this, that's going to have to be the connection.
And timing too, right?
Yeah.
There, like you just kind of highlighted, there's a lot of other really super pressing things that are going on where this probably isn't going to be top of the list. And yeah. Well, we appreciate your honesty and candor on that, because I know that's it's a tough one.
It's a tough one.
And there's one question or comment I have is that before even we start discussing about extending the tax break, I think the first thing, if they want to discuss about tax abatement, is extending the implementation of the new bill. It's because there are lots of applications which were supposed to come in. People would have stopped it at.
I totally get it. My comments are exactly the same. It's just going to be a lift. I mean, I get it. I get what the abatement has meant to the city. I understand what was happening. I've been around long enough. I know what was happening in the city before the abatement, and there wasn't a whole lot to talk about. And I know that even though the city was growing and there was strength, that there was still a big chunk of that was due to the abatement. I know particularly in our neighborhoods that have are the hardest to invest in. Some of them, the abatement doesn't make a difference because they are just so disinvestment disinvestment, it needs to get to a certain level before that can happen. But I know those fringy neighborhoods, the abatement really makes the difference. I get it, but you know, a lot of the constituents that we have in the city, the residents, and who the council folks hear from and who we hear from, abatement doesn't do anything for them as far as they're concerned.
Mhm.
You know, they've been very low employed, if employed at all, for a number of years, and they don't get how the abatement has assisted them. Or, you know, they're a long-term homeowner and they're not getting the abatement, and they don't. So I understand the economics of it. I'm just being candid. I don't think an economic argument gets you anywhere in the fall.
Okay. So let's talk about Washington, D.C. and its interplay with us. So, you know, pass some big old bills to get some money out into the economies, both on the national and local, state levels. Any of that coming back to Philadelphia as it relates to housing?
Yeah, so some of that is, you know, there was part of the first stimulus bill, or the second or third one, I don't know, they all run together. The CARES Act, I should say, did include an allocation of $5 billion in community development block grant. However, only $2 billion of that is being disseminated through the formula system, which means that Philadelphia, because we're a grantee, automatically gets a portion of that. So we're going to get about $26 million from that. We're on calls with HUD every day about understanding how we can use that money, because even though they've relaxed some requirements around it, we don't have a public service cap, which means we can spread it more easily around the city. We can use it for, I would say, people-based needs as opposed to place-based needs a little bit easier. And they've relaxed some of the public comment about how we get that money into our plan so we can access the dollars. They really haven't relaxed any of the other block grant regulations. And so, for example, our biggest need right now is rental assistance. Block grant dollars can be used for up to 3 months of emergency rental assistance only. We believe we need longer term rental assistance than that. And also HUD hasn't talked to us about what kind of documentation they will be requiring to ensure that whoever gets that rental assistance has met all the criteria. And frankly, if they're going to require paperwork like this, which is the standard for HUD, by the time somebody figures out how to get all that paperwork together and gets it to us, you know, the 3 months will have gone. So we're figuring out kind of how to stand something up that doesn't have that federal money in it, and hopefully we can sort of backfill some other things. So again, that's only $2 billion of the $5 billion that was set aside. $1 billion is for like states and stuff, so we don't have. The other $2 billion is discretionary, and the HUD secretary can spend it however he wants. We have no guidance on that, and we're really been asking that question every day, literally, of HUD. What's happening with that $2 billion? And getting our federal lobbyists to ask about that, and then really pushing for a relaxation of regulations, because we think we're going to have two huge needs. One is our most immediate is rent assistance, but when the mortgage forbearance periods end and stuff like that is also mortgage assistance, and we need the flexibility to be able to hit the needs of what this virus is creating as far as those housing needs. I will say this, we're also advocating at the federal level for that mortgage forbearance, similar to FHA mortgages, that you know, any mortgage forbearance should be added on to the back term of the loan. And also we are fighting to get liquidity into the mortgage markets. We think that that's really important as well. So that's the money that we have coming, housing specifically. The city is trying to go after, there's a lot of other money that the city can go after, and we are, but I think, you know, akin to the pitch that the mayor made is, we basically have no money coming in right now, like none. And so unless there's a huge local assistance package from the feds, every locality is going to just be scrambling, because unlike the feds, localities are required to have a balanced budget, and to have a balanced budget over the next several months is just going to be painful.
So you touched a little bit upon home ownership. A lot mentioned quite a few times rentals. What are you hearing as it relates to homeowners? Anything from city council? Is it too early to ask that question now, or where are things with that?
We're not hearing too much, honestly, about homeowners from council, other than I think they want to, they kind of support some sort of mortgage forbearance. I think they're on the same page with us, is that then that can't be a lump sum payment that's due in 3 months or 6 months or 12 months. That's going to be hard for folks to make those big payments. And so we're trying to think through that. There's already a ton of property tax relief programs for homeowners. And so I would say, honestly, there hasn't been a lot of conversation about homeowners. It's been mostly about renters, because, people, less people paid their rent in April than paid their rent in March, but it wasn't horrible. We expect it to really get bad in May.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, and right now the eviction courts are closed, but when those reopen, you don't want to be like, oh my God, look at the line for evictions. And I think there's an understanding also that a lot of these renters rent from smaller landlords, and just not paying the rent is not, that's not an answer, right? Because we can't put all these small landlords out of business, because then when we come back, we could have devastated our housing market. And so, we really got to figure, we've spent a lot of time explaining the interconnectivity, that you can't just push here. There's ramifications down the whole system, and we've got to be paying attention to that whole system.
We really appreciate hearing that, because one of the things that we constantly feel like we're advocating when we're talking to city council members is just that often the narrative becomes one of which it's the massive property owner with, this.
Yeah, we've been putting out there hard that that's not our housing market.
Yeah,
not our market at all.
Everybody
all. And we put that out. That's what, we've been pushing that with our local folks, but also at the federal level, to say, look, at a lot of the conversation you're having is not our housing market.
Yeah.
We don't have these big, HUD finance multifamily projects. That's not who provides our housing. And so we need a different approach. And it has to look at that whole supply chain. And we've been saying, and the reality is small landlords, that's a small business, but we know they've been left out of all the small business stuff because of how the kind of small business they're characterized as, which is, you can't leave them out of everything and expect them to survive. Yeah. And so we've been really trying to push that message out there. I think we're getting relatively well received, which is why we're saying, we need to stand up a rental assistance program. But again, we'll stand it up. I think it'll be more well-funded than some of the other large cities, the ones they stood up quicker, but it won't come anywhere near meeting the need we're going to have. So
let's go back a little bit. You mentioned Bill, I don't remember, it was House Bill or Senate Bill 841. Yeah,
Senate Bill. Mm-hmm.
Senate Bill 841, and that question is about that, and it's saying local taxing districts have the option to extend the property tax discount payment period to as late as August 31st, or waive any late payment penalties for any property tax paid in full by December 31st. Is there a plan for Philadelphia?
I don't know. That would be a decision made by the finance director. And I don't know, I will say this, I know there's been conversation about, sort of the backstop for any city when they're in a deficit issue is, well, you just raise taxes. And I think there's an understanding of that people can't pay their taxes now. Why do we think if the taxes were higher, people could pay taxes? So I don't think that that's necessarily the path they're going down in the immediate future. And I know there was some delay of taxes, but I don't know if they're talking about further delays, to be honest with you.
So we've been talking a lot about rental assistance and things along the rental market. There had been some chatter about rent control in Philadelphia by various candidates out in the campaign trail. Maybe that was a talking piece. Maybe that was legit. Who knows? It all remains to be, it all kind of remained to be seen what would really happen. We know that there was a resolution introduced to just examine the issue in City Council. Have you been hearing anything along those lines?
Not really. I mean, it's honestly been about how can we keep people in their homes?
Okay.
How can we figure out how to have maybe extending the eviction moratorium a little bit, but again, not encouraging people to not pay their rent. It's more about encouraging folks landlords and tenants to sit down and figure out a payment plan, hopefully supplemented by our rental assistance program to the best of our ability. That's been the discussion. The discussion has really been about how do we keep people in their homes. And we know that we can't keep people in their homes if all the landlords go bankrupt.
So, Ann, we got a compliment to you that it's, obviously, like we have an advocate who understands some of the things that are important to us and understands the business side and the government side, and it's a rare gem for us to have. So we really appreciate that, folks. GPAR, you have any questions now? Drop them in the chat. This is the time to do it. We're at 9:45. We want to be respectful of Ann's day because she probably has 73 more of these, considering now we know she works until 10 o'clock at night. And underneath of her desk right now, she's pedaling away, right? Getting in some
That's right.
revolutions
That's right.
per minute. Let's see. How is your office actually functioning? Is everybody kind of like remote now, or
we're getting there. We're getting there. We figured, the first couple of weeks were a little bit rough. It was just, I think everybody was just trying to keep the lights on in the city, and then we were able to kind of get that. We took a look at our budget and transferred as much money into the tech section as we could. We sent out an employee survey to find out who had what at home, and then realized that some employees couldn't respond because they had nothing. And then we figured out sort of what was the first tier of folks that needed to get back online, like finance, so we could pay vendors, things like that. And we got that deployed. We're now on the second tier, and so we got at least the really critical functions being able to be done from home. And now we are totally focused on trying to bring back our boards and commission meetings that require public involvement. And we were targeting May for some of our meetings, Planning Commission, Art Commission, Historical Commission, the Redevelopment Authority Board. And we now found out yesterday that we need to have an emergency meeting of the Planning Commission at the end of April to hear the revised capital budget. So there's been just frantic emails and Zoom calls and everything trying to stand that up. I think it's one thing to have a virtual meeting and have that platform, but how you get public participation, particularly when so much of the public who participates in our work does not have access to technology, and how do you do that fairly and equitably has really been a challenge for us. But like I said, the majority of our stuff we're trying to get stood up in May to the best of our ability. The ZBA and Civic Design Review will lag because there's just added complications in those. It's not, for example, CDR requires a community meeting, and we cannot compel communities to come together and meet in person until it's safe health-wise. And some of our RCOs have the tech capacity to do virtual meetings, others do not. So we're trying to figure out what kind of assistance we may be able to provide, but that's tricky in time of severely reduced resources. And we've got almost 300 RCOs. And same thing with ZBA, right? We're trying to figure out how we would even get the full package of material to board members And even if they could meet virtually, I would say that majority of folks that show up at our zoning hearings come from a place where they don't have access to technology, and we want to make sure that they have a platform for their voices to be heard. And so we're really just trying to think through that stuff now, understanding that we want to get the development process up and functioning again, because that is so much of the city's economic wherewithal depends on it. But how do you balance all that with public safety? And public safety is paramount. Those are the things that we're trying to work through.
Before we get into a couple more questions before we close things out, to our GPAR folks, I just want to let you guys know that it's really important to make sure that your fellow GPAR friends get on these things. This is super valuable information, and it provides an opportunity to go ahead and actually ask questions of the different people that we've had featured. Sure, you can go ahead and look at this thing after the fact, but the ability to really ask a question, given the dialogue that's going on, there's nothing better than actually experiencing it in the real time when you have somebody like Ann with us. So I just encourage you to next time bring a friend along, virtually, socially distance wise, whatever that looks like now, I don't know, but grab their hand virtually and pull them all into the chat room. We would love to see more people in here having this opportunity to engage with our different guests that we've had. So let's just kind of wrap things up. The city budget, the mayor introduced a budget back at the beginning of March. The world has changed dramatically since then. How rough do you think this new budget is that it's going to be when he introduces it?
So we are, a lot of what's going on this week is readjusting the budget. The mayor will probably do some kind of presentation of a revised budget towards the end of next week. You can basically rip up that budget from March. We're starting all over again. And what we are going through is unprecedented. It honestly makes the 2008-2009 recession and the 2002 one look like a drop in the bucket. It's going to be tough.
Let's go into these questions real quick. Forbearance. Know anything about forbearance? Anything you're hearing about?
I did see that question, and I share the same concern. It seems to be all over the place. And other than FHA coming out very clearly saying they're going to add on to the back end of the term, everybody else seems to be doing their own thing. And which is, again, why we're really pushing, and we'd like to see something that says that is the standard. That the standard is, if you forbear 3 months of mortgage payment, that you add 3 months on the back end of the term, or 6 months, and maybe you work out some kind of payment agreement where they're paying back a little bit over that time period. But this idea that people are going to be prepared to make a balloon payment, I would say it's just, I just don't think that's very realistic given where we are. I mean, again, to put things in perspective, right? At the height of the recession, the Great Recession, we had almost 9 million people out of work. We currently have over 22 million people out, and we haven't gotten the latest numbers yet. I mean, it's just staggering. And so I think it's really going to take time for people to catch up. And even though there are social, there's kind of very quickly trying to get some social safety net in place, we realize, again, just like what we said, the local government wasn't prepared. The state or the feds weren't either. All those sites are crashing. People can't get access to, so it's just going to take a while to come out of this. And this idea that people are just going to all of a sudden have this big chunk of money, I think is naive and short-sighted. And so I think it would be great if we just said, the way we're going to handle this is this. And most mortgage originators and servicers could afford to do that if the GSEs and the Treasury puts the liquidity into the market to do that, and they have the ability to do it. And so that's really what we're trying to push for, so that there is more uniformity, because right now it is kind of like the Wild Wild West out there.
Okay. So folks, before we get out of here, send messages to me giving us your thoughts and impressions of today's chat. We want to hear your feedback, good, bad, and ugly, one and all. And with that, we thank you
I
for
only
your
want to hear
time.
good. I only want to hear good.
We'll filter that out.
I've had enough bad.
Well, from the chat, as we see in the chat, we saw some good compliments, and that's pretty good because usually public officials do not tend to
That's
get.
all me. It's all those are coming from me.
Exactly. So, Ann, we thank you for your time. Thank you for all your insights. We appreciate the candid comments. This is very much value added. Good luck to you and your team. You know, everybody's doing this by the seat of their pants. So keep pushing forward. We're pulling for you, and we wish you good health. And
Right. Well, thanks so much for having me. And guys, really keep believing in Philly. We're going to come out of this. It's going to be rough at first, but we're going to come out. Believe in this city. Believe in your industry. Believe in our residents. We're going to come out of this at some point.
Great.
Take
Thank
it
you
easy,
very much,
guys.
Ann. Have an awesome day.
Thanks,
Take care.
you too. Bye.
All right, guys, make sure you jump on at 11:30 RPR. Take care. See you then. Bye.